Today we're going to talk about complex PTSD, being raised inside of an abusive family unit and being the black sheep, or the scapegoat inside of that family unit, what the effects of that emotional and psychological abuse can be, how that complex PTSD manifests, and what you can do about it. This is a question that comes from Rav. And it starts, I'm completely blagging for time here because I just pressed the wrong button. I'm using Windows 8 and I think that they've deliberately designed Windows 8 to be the least human friendly it can possibly be. It's completely confusing and everything is totally counterintuitive. Okay. As a direct result of the abuse, I'm just cherry picking bits from the email here. As a direct result of the abuse and emotional neglect that I experienced, one major hallmark of my CPTSD is the lack of being internally focused and self-serving. A recurrent theme in my conversations with Ravi is we talk a lot about how his ability to be self-nurturing and follow through and find success in life and be forward moving and assertive and masculine in a healthy way has been damaged by his experiences growing up. Sometimes I refer to this by the Malay word semangat, S-E-M-A-N-G-A-T, which is a word that means spirit, energy, intention, your ability to move forward. If your semangat is damaged, your ability to nurture yourself and protect yourself and look after yourself and make good decisions moving in alignment with your highest values is very, very difficult. Emotional abuse in any environment that goes on for a long enough period of time, if it's intense enough or long lasting enough, the corrosion that it does to the sense of self, to the semangat, is very damaging. And it's quite hard to heal. It's complicated to heal. That's why it's called complex PTSD. That's not really why it's called complex PTSD. It's to differentiate it from straightforward PTSD. From a very early age, my mum would scold me for being selfish and inject guilt into me for wanting things for myself only. A lot of these stories that I hear around CPTSD and childhood environments where people, adverse childhood environments, they tend to involve parents who clearly are personality disordered. Frequently you can have a typically, without wanting to get into a discussion of definitions and what it means and doesn't mean, but the typical description for borderline personality disorder, you'll have a borderline personality disordered mother and a classically over narcissistic or possibly psychopathic father. One or both parents might be a rage addict. Extreme dysregulation is the result within the family unit. A lot of hypocritical changing and altering of the narrative, and a lot of rules that just don't make sense or that change capriciously from day to day. Obviously a borderline mother or a borderline father would do the same thing. I hear a lot about the classically more what we call borderline, without getting into that, here's the thing, I've been meaning to do a video on feminism for a long time. I personally really like feminism, but my experience with feminism was positive. When I was at university I thought psychology was a load of shit. I did okay, I got my degree, but in my third year, out of spite, perversion, just a desire to be a bit wacky, I did a module in feminism as just for like whatever, I don't even care. It's like a churlish adolescent move. I was like, yeah, I'll do a module on feminism. And I actually really liked it because not the feminism that you're familiar with on the cyberwebs and the blogosphere and the YouTubes, but genuine, authentic, academic feminism that isn't just, misandry and rabid man-hating, but that actually seeks to genuinely, authentically challenge the way in which psychology as a subject is structured, the way sociology as a subject is structured, the way ideology itself is structured, not just what we think, but the implicit doctrine, the implicit ideology the template, the filter, the matrix of ideas that is unseen, unheard, invisible, you know, challenging all of those things. A lot of feminist writers are big on social constructionism and the way in which we construct ideas. So I don't want to get into a thing today about the fact that borderline as we understand it and narcissism as we understand it is massively sexist. The way that men describe borderline women comes with a huge amount of sexist assumptions. The way that men typically describe narcissistic men, the way that, what did I just say? Hello. Sorry, I'm not taking any caffeine at the moment. Sometimes I get a bit hazy. The way that women typically describe narcissistic men is fueled with a lot of sexist ideology. It's not gender neutral, and it's not critically thought through. So I'm not going to get into it today, but this is typical of a borderline mother, as it is reported to me, borderline being a questionable subtype only of narcissism that actually sometimes is misdiagnosed from CPTSD, etc., etc. But the typical borderline, massive fear of abandonment, huge amounts of dysregulation. The malignant borderline, who is basically a subtype of narcissist, that nasty predatory borderline, will use guilt and shame on her children to control them. Her fear, the borderline, this is another video that I meant to do ages ago and never got around to doing it. There's a link out there. It's called something like, the daughters of borderline mothers, or daughters being raised by borderline mothers, and it describes, there's an article, I'll find it for you, the process by which it's not just for daughters, it works for sons as well. If I am a borderline mother, or indeed a borderline father, I'm going to keep pre-qualifying and post-qualifying, you know. I've realised I need to do a bit more pre-qualifying and post-qualifying based on recent events. I need to make myself really clear. So imagine for a moment, put down your weaponry for a moment, put down your pitchforks for a moment, and imagine that I'm a borderline mother. So I have a little baby. Now my thing is massive fear of abandonment. I have a damaged sense of self. I had a sketchy relationship with my own parents, and my emotions are up and down, but I also feel entitled, and I'm also quite manipulative, and I am addicted to supply, narcissistic supply as we would normally know it, and this is where Richie runs off the range a little bit and does his own thing. I personally think your typical borderline, as is frequently described, and in my personal opinion I've seen just as many borderline, wink wink, nudge nudge, men as I have women. The malignant borderline, that narcissistic borderline, that very emotional, vulnerable, they call it the vulnerable narcissist, also called the covert narcissist, he says, not wishing to digress. So my thing is, I have a baby, and this baby is physically dependent on me. I mean, this baby doesn't judge me, it needs me. It can't leave me, it physically depends on me for its existence, and it's almost like a perfect relationship for somebody who's massively afraid of being abandoned. And I am godlike with this baby. You know, it literally feeds from my body. If you're breastfeeding, it literally is, it needs me to live, to the extent that it is an appendage for the first 6 to 12 months of life, before the central nervous system has developed, before the immune system has developed properly. It is an appendage because if you take the baby away from me, its survival rates will go down. And as we know, when you talk about narcissistic family units, cluster B personality disorders, they are all codependents in their hearts. And you go, but we're supposed to, the codependents are the victims. No, we're all codependents. The victim-predator dynamic, this little, this drama, role play, is played out between codependents. Broken boundaries. Now, if my boundaries are broken, I will let you in too far. But if my boundaries are broken, I will also penetrate too far into you. If I have no boundaries, how can I respect your boundaries? I don't know what a boundary is. So, what is he saying? He's saying the baby is perfect. Now, as the baby starts to individuate, as it should, and become its own person, you know, it reaches that age of saying no. To go a little bit Freudian for a second, it realises that it has the ability, the first control that the child has is over its own bodily functions. You know, it can choose to either go to the toilet or not. Wow, what power! And the euphoria that that brings. It can say no. It can become angry. The child, there'll be people in the comments going, he called a human child it! He's a psychopath! The child, so I don't have to keep saying he or she. Okay, let's say she. She can become angry, she can become clingy to the mother. Mine. Jealous. Don't you come towards my mummy, that's my mummy. Stay away from my mummy. All of these things, the child starts to individuate. My point is, I'm rambling, sorry, the mother will punish the child for the individuation, for the attempt to move away, because now you're inflicting narcissistic injury, accidentally. Narcissistic in the broad term, also including malignant borderlines within it. A borderline can have injury inflicted upon him or her very quickly and very easily. Hypersensitivity and lack of boundaries, right? You remember? Cluster Bs, hypersensitive, no boundaries. Very dodgy sense of self, very dependent on affirmation from the environment. Oh, I drifted off the range before, but I didn't finish. There's narcissistic supply. I think with your typical borderline, that narcissistic supply is a little bit different. They're addicted to sympathy. So their whole game is to foster sympathy and to constantly put themselves in any narrative, to twist the narrative so that they themselves are the victim, no matter how awfully they have behaved. So that narcissistic supply of the borderline, or of the covert narcissist, who is also known as a vulnerable narcissist, there will be, you will have this, yes, I want to be the king, the big, the strong, the greatest, the bestest, the most important, most wonderful, prettiest, smartest, whatever in the room, but then you'll see that variation of that, and you'll see cerebral and how is it called? Kinesthetic. Somatic narcissism in one person, and you'll see overt and covert tendencies in one person, and it's even been suggested that really overt and covert is meaningless, that they're just descriptions of strategies for gathering narcissistic supply, not of different personality disorders. Again, I'm not going there today. So they're addicted to sympathy. They become addicted to sympathy and being seen as the victim. Think about that for a moment. Think about people you know to whom that might apply, where every story that they have, the end game seems to be to get you to sympathise with them. Okay, so borderline mummy, little baby, boy or girl, doesn't matter. Little baby starts to move away from me. Oh, I don't like that. No, that doesn't feel good. Don't say no to me. Don't you fucking say no to me. Now, the no mummy, I'm not going to do that. Well, no, and the child will like smack that. I saw a kid do this recently. It was hilarious. Like the mum didn't give the sweet fast enough. The child was like, no, bad mummy, and smacked her in the knee. I was like, it's amazing. Expression of power. So, this will inflict a kind of narcissistic injury. So I'm trying to explain it. It's complicated, and it requires like a subtle understanding of all these different layers and levels in order for the work to be effective. Otherwise, you just end up chasing your own tail. If you paint with broad brushstrokes, you're a meanie and he's a goodie. It's not. You're not going to get anywhere like that, because that's not what it is. That's not reality. You're creating a map of reality that is too simplistic. Like if you drew England and went, well, it basically looks like this. Yeah, that'll do. There you go. Now take a ship around the coast. What's going to happen? You're going to hit the rocks because the map is not enough. Or it just won't work. It just will not work. You just keep spinning your wheels. So the mother starts to punish the child every time the child asserts. Now, that could be the child asserting herself, because there's a man in every woman and a woman inside of every man. You've got the Jungian idea of the anima and the animus. You've got to have a healthy relationship as a man. I have to have a healthy relationship. I can be a man, I can be macho, I can go and do boxing and lift weights and be out there, be loud and extroverted and whatever. But if I'm not also in touch with the other side of myself that's nurturing and that's kind and that's a little bit soft, stereotypically yin-yang. If you don't like the gender stereotypes, and you don't have to like them, from where I'm stood right now, you don't have to like them, but there are tendencies there that do seem to be genetically predetermined, but you know, that doesn't, you got a choice, you're a human, you can do amazing things. If you don't like them, you can reject them. So you can think more, if you don't like masculine, feminine behaviours, you can think in terms of yin and yang. It's much more, it's gender neutral, you know, terminology. But I have to be in touch with that more, I call it, feminine side of myself, or I'm going to be sick. I'm going to be a warped person. I could end up one of those two-dimensional, very brittle, macho man types, you know, full of testosterone, but dull to be around, like the kind of guy who after half an hour or so starts to give you a headache just over your right eye. Do you ever get that? Like a guy who's just so masculine it hurts your head after 30 minutes of talking to him, because everything comes back to that. So there needs to be balance, same thing with women. If they have a corrupted relationship with their own ability to be masculine and do typically forward-moving things, assertive things, yang energy things to assert themselves, you might have a woman who can't say no. You might have a woman who can't make a decision, choose an objective, and then take consistent action to just go for it without being pulled off left and right. You might have a woman who's very indecisive, can't choose an objective, can't work towards that objective, and as soon as anything else comes along, her attention is just pulled away. Very dependent, not so independent. This is where there's no balance. So fundamentally, boy or girl, you've not got a well-rounded individual, let's just say that, who's not being individuated. So in the case of the gentleman asking this question, how could you be individuated when your parents didn't give you the space to individuate? And we're just focusing on your mum. Pavlovian conditioning. Crazy Russian scientist, every time he rings the bell, he feeds the dog, he rings the bell, he feeds the dog, he rings the bell. Even when there's no food, the dog drools because the dog's brain goes, oh, a bell is ringing, it is time to eat now. I shall now produce saliva. In the same way, your mother in that environment is giving you Pavlovian conditioning. Every time you try and assert yourself and move forward, you get punished with guilt and shame. And you go, well, guilt and shame, that's, it's not like having acid put on your eyelids or, you know, cigarettes put out on you. No. But in the subjective, emotional, moment-to-moment, body-level experience of a child, your mother or your father holding you in contempt is enormously painful. It's hugely damaging. People have asked me numerous times to do videos on parenting, and I'm like, I don't know if I would presume to do that before I'm a parent myself. But there's a parenting tip for you. Don't take lightly the damage you can do with cruel words or a mocking sort of turn of phrase or even a tone of voice. The pain, it's about the subjective experience. I could imagine I said something to you with contempt when you were feeling sensitive. The reservoir of emotion fills up with that negativity, with that pain, with that discomfort. It goes through your whole body. It's a very, very unpleasant experience. Shame, humiliation is a horrendous thing to feel. Guilt is, you know, perhaps not as bad, but it's a close second. So why do the parents do that? Because these are personality disordered people. They don't have a moral compass. They don't have clear objectives and boundaries and are not individuated themselves. They're the opposite of a codependent is a sovereign individual, an individuated individual. When you are a child, you're supposed to be dependent on your parents, but then you're supposed to break away from that dependence and to individuate. Hopefully by the time you're 12, 13, you should be, by the time you're 8, you're supposed to have individuated. You're supposed to know, I'm me, you're you. I'm not my daddy, I'm not my mummy, I'm not my brothers and sisters, I'm me, I'm separate. With the codependent inducing environment, an emotionally abusive environment, there's bleed out of emotion where you're now responsible for how your dad feels because he's guilt tripping you all the time because, you know, he never really wanted you, your mum pressured him into it, and then when you were 2 he lost his job at the factory, so now he's under pressure to make money for a child that he never really even wanted in the first place, and you feel that, it burns. You can't give it words, you can't verbalise it, you're 4. What chance have you got? All of this stuff is there in the background. So I really feel people's frustration. I mean, I would get so frustrated with myself with the CPTSD and the broken ego boundaries when I was younger that I would literally hit myself, like punch myself in the face, and just like I'd have rage attacks. But I didn't know who to direct the rage at, so the rage would just go back inward again. That stopped, but then in my 20s when I was doing door work, which is nightclub security, it was all kinds of crazy self-destructive, low impulse having behaviours. You know, I was an adrenophile, obsessed with leading an exciting life, and basically I think I was trying to kill myself in an indirect way, and so I put myself in harm's way several times and very nearly succeeded. Before that I wanted to join the army, and when I wanted to join the army I wanted to go straight into the parachute regiment. I mean, it was, you know, I think there was a strong drive there to self-destruct. Out of spite, out of a rage that I couldn't explain and couldn't describe. I was watching a Pia Melody video about codependency. I highly recommend her videos. They're free on YouTube, they're great. One of the things that really stood out for me from the Pia Melody video, Ravi, is, I might have said this to you when we met up in London, is the emotionally abusive environment that codependents live in make them allergic to their own emotions, and that's what you're describing here, as being allergic to your own feelings. Why can't you assert yourself? Why can't you be a man? Well, because your mother and your father punished you for that when you were growing up. So the motherboard of the computer, that before we even got into the software, was smashed up because they didn't want a man. They didn't want an individuated man in the house, young man in the house who was challenging them and thinking for himself and maybe would question their weirdness and their hypocrisy and their nonsense. They wanted somebody who was subservient. So you're now fighting between two sets of programming. You are aware, because you're intelligent, that the world requires you to be a certain way, and every time you push towards that, this old programming shuts you down and says, no, you're not allowed to do that. And I think that's the essence of what you've asked me in this email here. From a very early age, my mum would scold me for being selfish and inject guilt into me for wanting things for myself only. You're selfish. You're just selfish. You're a selfish child. I would have to share everything and wasn't able to own anything. Alone, this probably wasn't the most damaging, but when you put everything else together, at the root of my psyche is a program which codes for everyone else first and me second. I'll say that again. At the root of my psyche is a program which codes for everyone else first and me second. That's the essence of codependent programming, as I understand it at this point. You say you weren't allowed to have your own things. In an environment where that's fair, and everybody's living in the communist model, and everybody's living in the horizontal model of, you know, property is theft and you all share whatever it is that you have, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Many things that could be abusive over here might not be abusive over there. Abusive in one context might not be abusive in the other context. The most important thing is that it's fair. I was raised, at one time in my life, I was raised in a boarding school, and we got hit quite a bit. Not like, we weren't smashed, like, we weren't teachers holding us down, elbowing us in the face. It wasn't like, but you get hit around the head, you get kicked in, you know, in the bottom. Like, get out. There was violence in the air. And some of the rules and some of the regulations that I lived under, it was a very religious school, were very, very strict. But I actually flourished in that environment because the rules didn't change. That rigidity and that crazy rule, like old English boarding school, we still had something called fagging, which you're going to have to go and Google, like, fagging. To Americans, they'll be like, fagging? I'm pretty sure that's illegal. I don't think you can make children do that. Yeah, fagging. We had fagging and we had fatigues. It was very old school. I was at the very tail end of that phase. And I also was in that boarding school around the time that in one of these private schools a young man walked into, this is in England, and shot. He walked into a classroom and shot one of his teachers. A high pressure environment, not very healthy. I certainly wouldn't send my kids into it, but it made more sense. The coordinates made more sense to me than my home life, than my family environment, because it was fair. The rules were applied to everybody across the board. And if a teacher hit you or shouted at you or you got punished, it wasn't personal. It wasn't because they hated you. or because they were just frustrated or were drunk or had a bad day. It was for a reason. And so my point is, my dear chap, you were raised in an environment where the rules weren't properly in place. The other thing that I say to people when I'm coaching them is like, well, when you're a teenager, sounds small this, were you in a house where the bedroom door, your bedroom door would just be open without knocking? And it's actually quite an important thing. Maybe again, parental advice for you all. Well, 2 pieces of parental advice. Your kids are going to do what you do before they do what you say. So if you want your kids to do something, you should do it first. Don't ask your kids to do something that you don't do. Don't tell your kids to take the shoes off at the door if you don't take your shoes off at the door. The second thing is, past the age of 13, once your kids have hit puberty, yeah, you should really just open their bedroom doors without knocking. You know, you should. It's a movement towards individuation. Everybody's going to forget. Everybody's going to make a mistake and just like absent-mindedly walk in. But try not to do that, because you want, if you want your children to grow up healthy and individuated, they need to start forming their own space. They need to start forming their own boundaries. All teenagers do that. In my household, there was one of the things that I wasn't discouraged from at all. I was allowed to do a lot of things. You know, that age where suddenly you want to put posters up on your wall, stickers on your door, keep out, no parents, cool skateboarding crew inside, pow. That's literally what happened when I was a kid, and my parents were just like, yeah, whatever, just do that then. I became obsessed with stickers. I was into skateboarding, the Santa Cruz skateboards. I think they're still going. I loved them, and I loved their logos and their branding, and I wanted to put that everywhere. I was allowed to do that. And now I look back and I go, why? Because I think you're trying to mark your own territory. You're trying to tell the world who you are and about yourself. And if you're in a healthy environment, that is to be, you know, crazy shit that kids do. They get piercings and dye their hair and dress crazy and all of that. That's an effort towards individuation. And it will pass much quicker if it's accepted and even encouraged rather than resisted and mocked. I'm now drifting off on parenting. So, okay, let's see. Into adult life, of course it manifests outwardly as people-pleaser syndrome, assertiveness issues, general lack of success, etc., even probably reflected through my body language. But internally, my mind jumps automatically to movies and pictures of the other person and my being subservient to them. Ultimately, it isn't any great surprise. How could 2 mentally ill people raise a child in a way that would encourage him to self-serve and to pursue his own dreams? So yeah, you'll probably find that what's happening is every time you try and assert yourself, be successful, or move forward in your life, or you know, even just change your body language, what's stopping you is an emotional flashback. So somebody contacted me recently and they're like, I'm in a state of desperation here. What do I do? How do I recover from the CPTSD? Go and get the Pete Walker book, Complex PTSD from Surviving to Thriving. I think, you know, we got our one off Amazon for like, I don't know, £6 or something. It's well worth it. It's a great book. Read it. Find out what your trauma style is, your trauma responses of one of the 4 Fs. You'll either be fight, flight, freeze or fawn. Work around that, do all the exercise in the book, and then quite simply, one at a time, seek to reduce your emotional flashbacks. Find the trigger for emotional flashback and reduce it. Find the trigger for emotional flashback, reduce it. Realize how often you're flashbacking. You know, I've had whole periods of my life where I don't think I wasn't not flashbacking. I think for like, in 2009, for about 6 months, I went through a long flashback that just went down in strength and increased and went down in strength. You know, I was just flashbacking all the time. And I was being triggered to flashback all the time. And you've got to learn how to control these things and go, okay, I'm in a flashback. I'm going to follow the Pete Walker advice on handling that. And this thing of your mind moving automatically to movies and pictures, we're talking internal representations in a sort of neurolinguistic programming way here, of the other person and you're being subservient to them, that's the programming. So you could fucking get angry and anxious and be like, fuck, why am I fucking thinking like that? You know, don't. Just go, there it is again. This is where, you know, humour is really important. There's two things that I really want this channel to be about that, like, people can take away from it. This whole thing of, like, the Spartans and, you know, the idea of being individuated and tough and rigorous and self-disciplined and being willing to accept discomfort, willing to accept pain. The other thing is that the Spartans had a very, very good sense of humour, and they were very, very clear thinkers. That's what they were known for. They were known for being laconic. And so it's good to develop that skill. The two things. One, learn to be a better thinker. Just improve your quality of thought, become more philosophical, study a little bit of basic level philosophy, study a little bit of critical thinking, learn to criticize your own thought patterns, and learn to, you know, study logical fallacies and go, oh shit, I think I just fell into a logical fallacy or a cognitive bias. So become a better thinker. You know, your mind is your sword, is your weapon, is how you surgically, like a blade, cut through the veils of illusion, is with your mind. And you probably get as much from studying Western philosophy and logical fallacies and cognitive biases as you will from studying something foreign and exotic and funky and sexy like Buddhism or something like that. Do them both. Do it both. Get a bit of balance on the go. And the second thing is your sense of humour. You know, when you're angry, try and find what's funny. When you're frustrated, try and find what's funny in it. Humour is always a reframe. Well, technically, without wanting to turn this into a talk about humour, there's nothing less funny than psychologically and analysing what humour is. Humour is always the clashing of two non-congruent, inappropriate frames together. You think I'm talking about this, but the punchline is I was talking about this the whole time. Oh, that's humour. That's what's funny. So if you can think in a humorous way, then you can fight this stuff. Mental clarity and humour. So when these pictures and movies come up, don't fight them. The more you push them down, the more they'll push back. It's just an organic reflex. I don't know why it happens like that. I just know that it happens like that. You know, I'm just a mechanic at the end of the day. I just pop the engine, find how to move stuff, and pop the hood, sorry, look at the engine, find what works, move it around and make the changes. I don't always know theoretically, academically, why everything is like that. But don't resist the movies and the pictures. Just look at them and go, oh, right, I'm doing that thing. I'm doing that thing he talked about. That emotional flashback thing is happening right now. See that. So that is one way out of it, is to, you know, the biggest, most powerful step is say, I'm in an emotional flashback right now. These movies and these pictures represent an emotional flashback. These internal representations are trying to draw me into an altered emotional state of anxiety, self-loathing, the same old shit, you know, that you've been going through again and again and again at the emotional level for a long period of time. Okay, I think this lack of internal coherence is partially what people are talking about when they mention a weak sense of self, and I think it overlaps massively with dissociation. Yes, it does. Split personality has been ruled out as a discrete psychiatric entity, but my mind hasn't felt far off that. I think this is just me. This is just my personal opinion. The most cinematic, dramatic elements of the idea of a split personality were rejected because, you know, there is politics with a small p within psychology and within psychiatry. There is a concept can just get carried away with itself. Like the concept of narcissism, when it's just applied as a layman's term, can get carried away with itself. You know, we can see the kind of crazy ways in which the term just gets abused. These are proper psychological terms. They get taken, they get used, and if you challenge anybody who's using them, they're like, fuck you, I'm going to use your hair there, fuck you, man. And you're like, okay then, so is there any chance of reasonable dialogue? No, because fuck you. Okay then, fine. Good day to you. Split personality does have a functional meaning. I've seen this up close and personal, and people have even accused me of it. When you're in one emotional state versus another emotional state, you're accessing a different personality. When I used to teach, I base this on myself, observing myself. When I used to teach self-protection, I would actually teach people to develop something called a suprastate. the superstate concept was the idea that if you want to do violence, if you're a normal, civilized, polite, hello, good morning human being, then it's not going to come naturally to you that if somebody attacks you when you're not ready, you know, in some odd situation where you're carrying your shopping and you're thinking about what DVD to rent tonight, that you're going to turn around, smash them in the face, gouge them in the eyes, headbutt them, drop an elbow on them, throw them to the floor, stamp on them and run away screaming. It's not socially acceptable behaviour. Going, ah! Is not, you know, you can't, it's not like people go, oh, why didn't you shout? You can't shout. It's not polite. It's animalistic, and we're supposed to not do that. So there is this conditioning away from certain behaviours. So you need a superstate to allow you to access that, because that shout is the thing that's going to save me when it goes off. That emotional intensity, that emotional state, that intent, that will to do harm is what's going to save me. It's not my kung fu skills. Sorry. That's not how it works. So I've seen that. When you have dissociation, especially through trauma, it can induce what is effectively a split personality. The person changes persona. They become a different person. It's not that they can't remember what the other person, you know, like in the movies, in the books, you know, I go and stab somebody and I go, oh, I'm not being Timothy now I'm being Frederick, so I can't go to jail because Frederick didn't do it. You know, you like, that's a bit extreme. I'm not saying that that doesn't happen. I don't know. It's widely refuted in the psychiatric community, but some very well-respected psychiatrists and researchers say no, that absolutely happens. You have a completely different person within one body and they do something that the person doesn't know. And we'll start an argument about that, mainly because I don't know enough about it. The idea of a split personality shouldn't be done away with. Dissociative identity disorder is a more subtle description of what goes on. Something close to that happens. It's a model of reality and it can't be simplified, unfortunately. It has to remain nuanced. You know, so what I'm saying is, like, so if your mate is in one mood and then you see him the next day and he's in a bad mood, or he's a bit hungry, or he's a bit hungover, or something bad has happened to him, is he being a different person? Well, yeah, kind of. It's like a mini personality that's being accessed. And you'll notice that, literally. I mean, if you study CPTSD and you study psychology more, your mate, when he's a bit down, might become very, very self-pitying. When normally he wouldn't. He says things that he wouldn't normally say. And what it is, he's actually accessing a different part of his brain. My opinion. I've not seen proper research for this. I think this is what's happening. Maybe they'll even access the age at which the trauma occurred. So all of a sudden your mate is now talking and acting like a spoiled 14-year-old, but he's, you know, a 28-year-old. It's like, why have you altered into this? Why have you gone back into the state? So split personality, like Timothy and Frederick, as I described over here. I don't know why I did this voice. Timothy stabs people. Frederick totes would never do that. So it might not be as distinct, discrete, separate, where they don't even remember, as that could do. I've said and done things, I've even written things in an altered state of consciousness. People said to me, you said that, and I go, no I didn't. And then they'll show me where I wrote it, and I go, fucking hell, did I really write that? It can happen, and the worse the emotional flashback, the more likely that is to occur. So I can't imagine stabbing somebody to death and then completely forgetting about it, but what do I know? Maybe. If Timothy, who's the bad one? Frederick was the nice one. Timothy was the bad personality. What if Timothy takes drugs? That's blind drunk, snorts coke, takes heroin, blah 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 blah. Maybe he could actually go out and kill somebody and then alter state and then come back and wouldn't remember anything. Maybe. That's not what this is about. But the split personality thing is okay. When you've seen it in yourself, yes, it's a model. These are all models of reality within the brain, within the psyche, within this thing that we call in the mind, and something like that seems to occur. So I think it's useful. Okay, as I realise all of this, it is shocking. Why can't I get traction in my life? Why am I not results focused? What the hell have I been doing for 23 years? 23? Dude, calm down. 23? Do you want to know what a mess I was when I was 23? You were barely tying my shoelaces. What were you doing for 23 years? You were reeling from abuse. You were punch drunk with confusion and frustration and emotional abuse. What have I been doing for 23 years? Surviving. You know, holding on, clinging on, holding on to your sanity as best as you can. This is the virus, isn't it? You could call it a virus, yeah, I guess. The end result of such abuse. Yes, it is the end result of such abuse. It has the effect of going right into the person and breaking the cogs which make the machine operate. Bonkers. Yes, it is bonkers. If you are evil enough to make a person into a zombie, then this is the way to do it. Make sure the person can't and won't help themselves, put themselves first. Can't and won't help themselves or put themselves first, and brainwash them into flooding them with guilt anytime they attempt to do this. Yes. If I look honestly at myself, I'm a wishy-washy, vague person. No, you're not. I've met you twice. You're not a wishy-washy, vague person at all. That is your guilt and shame and your inner critic talking. But now I feel that things are starting to change positively. I'm doing meditation every day for 5 minutes. In 3 weeks, I've only missed one day. I'm going to put it up by 2 minutes. Dude, come on now. Warriors, 20 minutes, half an hour. When I were a lad, and I would do an Aikido with Terry Ezra. I used to do with Terry Ezra of the Komiokan Dojo. Dropping names here. You'd be like, who's Terry Ezra? He's a big name in Aikido. An hour in the downtown in a dojo, beautiful dojo he's got there, in downtown Birkenhead. Bit of heating on. We did have a bit of heating, but we wouldn't move for 1 hour, and you didn't dare because Terry Ezra Sensei is ferocious. You know, you come out of meditation, both my feet would be blue. I just couldn't walk. Yeah, you can do more than 5 minutes. Meditation is great for this. If your intention is, I know I have CPTSD, what I'm attempting to do is ground myself in this reality. Ground myself in this reality. Ground myself in which reality? Oh, this reality. The now. This one. Okay. Coming to your final point, from early childhood I lost my edge and competitiveness. Perhaps one reason I haven't felt so divorced. Perhaps one reason is why I have felt so divorced from my masculinity. Yeah, but I don't know. Again, as I said earlier, it's a social construct. Masculinity is affected by social constructs. It's not a neutral term. I know what you mean. You know what you mean. Everybody watching this knows what you mean. But what you mean might be slightly different from what I mean, and those subtle differences can make all the difference. So your whole map of what it means to be a man is likely to be distorted. And I'm not trying to induce guilt and shame in you. Mine was very distorted because my model for being a man was a distorted individual, a very, very sick, deeply sadistic, narcissistic, psychopathic, borderline individual of the works, you know, who, yeah, it was bad news. So somebody like that as a model for masculinity, that's not good. So I realised at a young age it wasn't good, so I picked my own models for masculinity, and a lot of them were just massively about overcompensation. And I've discussed this in other videos, and so there would be fictional characters that I would model as models for masculinity, which is not, it's not freaking sensible. But I was a child, I didn't have any other point of reference, didn't know what else to do. But your sense of being a man is probably a little bit skewed. Okay, the net effect of everything I've showed you is that I've rationed the amount of success I have. I can't have too much success because that wouldn't be fair. That would be self-centered and selfish and bad. Okay, so straight up piece of self-sabotage programming there. If I'm successful, that makes me selfish, self-centered and bad. So I guess one of the mantras to start with would be, I can learn to feel that being successful is okay. You're not going to go directly against the injunction that it's bad, success is selfish and bad. You just like Aikido your way around it. Find a gentle path rather than, you know, hitting it too hard. Writing it out, you can see how fucking ridiculous it is. It would look ridiculous to the uninitiated, but I am initiated. No, it doesn't look ridiculous. It makes sense to me, and probably to most people watching this, it makes perfect sense. But you can be that brainwashed if the traumatic context is bad enough. Yes. Just simply feeling good becomes a crime. In fact, being a person and having an ego becomes a crime too. So you get it then. That's what it is. In fact, being a person and having an ego becomes a crime. you were punished for that crime of being a person, separate person, and having an ego, individuated ego, probably from the age that you started developing it, mate, from the age of 2. So if you imagine you're not you, imagine you're a psychologist, and I have another chap who's called Bill, and we take Bill, and he, from the age that he started to develop his own individuation, his own individual ego and sense of self, he was savagely shamed for it and punished for it. How's Bill going to be? Okay, so you see, so that compassion and understanding that you apply to Bill, now you need to learn to apply that compassion and understanding to yourself and go, it's okay, it wasn't my fault. It's not your fault, it's not your fault. If I could do a Boston accent, but I can't do that. The dog farted in September. No. Just simply, what? Yep, okay. In fact, being a person becomes a crime too. There is no you. There is no you. There is no you, screamed the abusive parents. Only an appendage who will serve. Yeah, that's the injunction under which we labour. And that's obviously not going to make anyone a very healthy, happy adult for the rest of their lives, is it? If you're told there is no you, there is no you. Pete Walker has said that the inner critic in CPTSD is literally a damaged superego which takes over the psyche in childhood, and a self-loving ego does not develop. I don't always like the Freudian model, but I find the psychodynamic approach really good for CPTSD problems. Yeah. I would agree that with what Pete Walker said there, the inner critic in CPTSD is a damaged superego, which takes over the psyche in childhood, and a self-loving ego does not develop. I would add to that, and I'm pretty sure, in fact I know Pete Walker says this in the book, a self-loving ego can't develop when you don't have loving parents. Your map, model, coordinates, basis, template for developing a self-loving ego comes directly from them. It's a direct reflection of their love for you. Your parents are supposed to teach you how to love yourself. Your parents are supposed to... Your parents, my God. They sick gong young men, yeah. They sick gong young men, yeah. Your parents... Oh, sorry. Your parents are supposed to be the model for teaching you how to love yourself. So if your parents don't love you the way that they should, you literally don't know how to. If your parents withdraw that love, you as a child de facto assume you are not lovable because there's an absence of the love that's supposed to be there. So again, yeah, there is a lack of a self-loving ego there because they didn't show you how to do it. They sick gong, young men, yeah. That's not a good Cantonese accent, but I do my best. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that's it for today. I hope you found that useful. Got any further questions and comments and stuff, bang them in the comment section below. And all there's left to say is thank you very much for your time and your attention, and I will speak to you again soon. Thank you.